When Isabel saw the simple man's interact card be declined by the machine for the third time while his daughter watched with eyes trying to mask both shame and hunger after her hockey practice, she was not merely witnessing a failed transaction during her shift at Tim Hortons. She stood before a moral choice that would trigger a neurochemical cascade capable of reshaping not only her fate in Vancouver, but the very definition of compassion in the minds of all who witnessed her. Unmistakably Canadian act of generosity. The Tim Hortons in the heart of Gastown breathed with the familiar energy of an autumn Saturday afternoon. Outside, red and gold maple leaves danced across the windows. Inside, the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and newly baked donuts created an atmosphere that was quintessentially Canadian. Isabel moved between tables with the efficiency of someone balancing overnight shifts at the University of British Columbia with the job that funded her social work degree, her red uniform contrasting with the genuine smile she offered every customer. She did not only see orders of double-doubles and Timbits to be fulfilled, but human stories unfolding in a welcoming space. The elderly couple sharing a Canadian maple donut as they had for 50 years of marriage. The international student reviewing engineering notes between spoonfuls of chili. The mother feeding her baby with one hand while organizing with the other the next Parent-Teacher Association, PTA, meeting at the local school. When Mark and Sophie walked in, something in the room's energy shifted, almost imperceptibly. The man wore simple clothes from Mark's work warehouse that looked new but ill-fitting, as if he was not yet used to those practical pieces. The girl, about 8 years old with neatly braided hair, carried a hockey bag and kept her eyes lowered while quietly observing everything with an intelligence beyond her years. They chose a corner table, far from the bustle near the roll-up-the-rim counter. Isabel approached with her order tablet, noticing the tension in Mark's shoulders as he asked for 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, a portion of Timbits, and 2 hot chocolates. His hands trembled slightly when he tapped the Interact debit card, and when the device beeped its first refusal, a flush rose to his face that contrasted sharply with the typical Canadian calm. "It must be the connection," Isabel said gently in her softly Franco-Canadian English, trying to shield his dignity. "Sometimes the system slows down on Saturdays. I will try again." The second and third failures created a palpable tension that seemed to defy the cafe's welcoming air. Sophie shrank into her chair, her gaze fixed on the plate of Timbits a nearby table shared during their planning session for the next hockey game. The hunger in her eyes was so visceral it triggered the same empathic neural circuits in Isabel's brain that had led her to study social work. "Father, you do not have to," Sophie whispered, her small voice carrying the weight of an early maturity no child should bear. "We can eat at home." Mark looked at his daughter, his eyes showing a mixture of frustration and paternal love that produced instant cognitive dissonance in any onlooker. Here stood a man clearly devoted to his child, yet inexplicably unable to provide the most basic meal. That was the moment Isabel made the decision that would spark the first great spike of dopamine in the viewer's experience. She looked at Sophie, then at Mark, and finally at Charles, the manager, who watched from a distance with an expression that blended practical concern and professional skepticism. The system must really be having issues today, Isabel announced loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I am putting this down as the house's courtesy today." The relief that washed over Mark's face was so intense it induced an immediate release of oxytocin in the viewer. The neural reward for witnessing another's suffering eased. But it was Sophie's expression, her eyes lighting with gratitude so pure it felt almost physical, that sealed the emotional bond that would hold the audience to the end. As Isabel prepared the order, she did not know she was about to discover that certain kindnesses, especially those offered in the humble setting of a Canadian Tim Hortons, have a peculiar way of returning in measures that defy all logic and expectation. While Isabel set the grilled cheese sandwiches and Timbits on the table where Mark and Sophie waited with the quiet gratitude of those receiving not only food but restored dignity, she was not merely doing her job as a server. She was weaving invisible threads of human connection that would release torrents of oxytocin in the viewer's brain, forging an emotional bond so powerful it would turn a simple meal into a transformational moment that would define the destiny of everyone involved. As Isabel carefully placed the plates on the table, the hot sandwiches, the colorful Timbits arranged like little works of art, the hot chocolates with marshmallows floating like sweet clouds, something extraordinary began to happen inside the Tim Hortons. The tension that had hung like a heavy mist started to dissipate, replaced by a shared vulnerability that made room for genuine connection. "Thank you," Mark said, his voice carrying a weight far beyond gratitude for a meal. I will bring the money tomorrow. I promise." Isabel smiled, her face reflecting an understanding born not only of her social work training, but of her own experience as a university student struggling to keep the bills balanced. "Do not worry about it. Everyone has days like this." Then she noticed Sophie studying the Timbits with an intensity that suggested this was not only physical hunger, but hunger for normalcy, for simple childhood moments that seemed to be slipping away from her. Without a second thought, Isabel took an extra Timbit from the counter and placed it on the girl's plate. "This one is maple, my favorite," she said, her tone creating a safe space where Sophie could simply be a child. The smile that lit Sophie's face was so bright it seemed to change the cafe sliding. "Thank you. I have never tried the maple one before." While Mark stepped outside to make a quick call, likely trying to resolve the card situation, Isabel realized Sophie was eating alone at the table. Moved by an instinct beyond professional duty, she grabbed a cup of tea for herself and sat for a moment in the chair beside the girl. "Do you play hockey?" Isabel asked, nodding to the bag with the Canucks logo. Sophie brightened immediately. "Yes. I am a goalie on the school team. We have an important game next week against the school in Burnaby." They began to talk about hockey, the thrill of guarding the net, the pressure of decisive games, the camaraderie of the team. Isabel shared that her younger brother was also a goalie, and that she understood the special courage the position demanded. "My father promised he will come to my next game," Sophie said, her eyes showing a fragile hope that almost broke Isabel's heart. "He works very hard, but he said this time he will make it." As their conversation flowed, something magical happened neurologically in the viewer. Every shared laugh, every look of understanding, every moment of genuine connection released oxytocin, the neurotransmitter of social bonding that creates emotional need for more positive interactions. Mark returned a few minutes later, his face showing a mix of relief and embarrassment. "I managed to fix the banking situation. Tomorrow everything will be back to normal." He looked at Isabel and Sophie laughing together, and something in his expression shifted. It was no longer only gratitude for a meal, it was deeper, more meaningful. It was the recognition that his daughter, who often seemed to grow up too fast, was having a genuine childhood moment with a stranger who had chosen compassion over convenience. "Thank you for everything," Mark said to Isabel, his words carrying layered meanings neither of them fully understood yet. When it was finally time for Isabel to return to her shift, she left on the table not only the house courtesy check, but a small note written on the back of a roll-up-the-rim coupon. "Good luck in the game, goalie. Isabel." Sophie kept the note like a treasure, tucking it carefully into the pocket of her hockey jacket. In that simple moment, in an ordinary Tim Hortons in Vancouver, not only was a precious memory born, but a seed was planted for a transformation, proving that the most meaningful connections often begin with the simplest gestures. And as father and daughter stepped into the cold Canadian afternoon, Isabel could not know that this spontaneous act of generosity was about to set off a chain of events that would redefine not only her future, but the very understanding of what it means to build a genuinely connected community in the multicultural mosaic of Canada. While Isabel watched Mark and Sophie fade into the damp afternoon mist of Vancouver, a brief peace flooded her heart. Peace that would be brutally interrupted when Charles, the Tim Hortons manager, approached with the stern expression of a man who had seen too many good intentions fail against the hard reality of financial ledgers, unleashing a neurochemical storm of adrenaline and cortisol that would set her moral conviction against pragmatic cynicism in a clash that would define not only her job, but her character. The calm Isabel had felt at witnessing the genuine gratitude on Sophie's face dissipated as quickly as Vancouver's morning fog when Charles approached. His steps were heavy, measured, carrying the weight of 20 years managing fast food establishments in Canada's competitive market. His eyes, marked by the strain of balancing tight budgets and satisfying corporate demands, fixed on Isabel with an intensity that knotted her stomach. Charles did not need a word. His rigid stance, folded arms, and expression mixing disappointment with professional resignation spoke louder than any reprimand. He was the embodiment of the pragmatism that had brought his family from Quebec to British Columbia 2 decades earlier, a man who believed in hard work and clear rules, not in impulsive gestures that risked the financial stability of the store. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but carried the authority of years navigating the complexities of the Canadian service sector. He explained, with the tired patience of someone who had had this talk countless times, that corporate policies existed for specific reasons, to protect not only the franchise's profits, but the very job security of employees like Isabel. Every unauthorized house courtesy was a hole in the monthly balance sheet, a dangerous precedent that could invite abuse. Isabel listened, her fingers trembling slightly as she mechanically straightened sugar sachets and coffee stir sticks. Each of Charles's words landed like a blow against the moral conviction that had guided her moments earlier. He mentioned other employees who had tried to be heroes, only to learn that generosity did not pay the bills at the end of the month. Stories of servers who discovered the hard way that Canadian business rewarded efficiency, not sentimentalism. Yet as Charles spoke, something extraordinary began to take shape within Isabel. Instead of the doubt and regret he intended to instill, a quiet determination started to grow in her chest. She remembered Sophie's eyes, not only the physical hunger that had been eased, but the emotional hunger for genuine connection, for moments of normal childhood in a life that clearly carried its own invisible complexities. She recalled her classes at the University of British Columbia, where social work professors emphasized that true compassion often required the courage to challenge established systems when those systems failed to serve the most basic human needs. She thought of her own parents, immigrants who had arrived in Canada with little more than the clothes on their backs and the resolve to build a better life, and how anonymous neighbors had stepped in when help was most needed. When Charles finished his practical speech, expecting Isabel to retreat in humiliation or promise never to repeat the mistake, he found instead a young woman whose eyes shone with a conviction that transcended her age and experience. Isabel did not apologize. She did not promise to be more careful. She calmly explained that some decisions cannot be measured in dollars and cents, that the true value of service work lay in creating spaces where people could find not only food, but dignity. She spoke about Sophie not as a customer, but as a child who needed to be reminded that the world still held kindness, especially in a Canadian society that prided itself on community values. The silence that followed was as thick as the Pacific fog beginning to curl around Gastown outside. Charles studied Isabel, his eyes showing not anger, but a kind of resigned admiration, the admiration of a man who had long since lost the ability to believe that individual gestures could matter within a system so vast and impersonal. He did not fire her. He did not issue a harsher reprimand. He only shook his head slowly and returned to his office, leaving Isabel alone with the echo of her convictions and with the viewer's rising neurochemical anticipation, now fully invested in whether Isabel's moral courage would be rewarded or punished in a world where pragmatism so often defeats idealism. While Isabel walked along the shore of False Creek under Vancouver's fine rain, each drop felt like an echo of the doubts now besieging her mind, doubts that formed a perfect neurochemical storm of anticipatory dopamine mixed with anxious cortisol, turning a simple moral decision into an existential conflict that would make the viewer question not only Isabel's fate, but the very foundations of their convictions about kindness and consequence in modern Canadian life. The next shift at Tim Hortons passed with agonizing slowness for Isabel. Every customer who stepped to the counter seemed to carry the potential silent judgment of Charles, every successful transaction a reminder of the one that had failed hours earlier. Her co-workers, usually partners in the synchronized rhythm of service, now seemed to watch Isabel with looks blending morbid curiosity and a cautious kind of admiration, the admiration reserved for those bold enough to challenge the unwritten rules of survival in the service industry. When the clock finally marked the end of her shift, Isabel almost ran out the door, her need for space and fresh air as visceral as the hunger she had seen in Sophie's eyes. The fine rain falling over Vancouver seemed to wash not only the streets of Gastown, but the raw wounds of her moral uncertainty. She walked toward False Creek, the soft sound of waves against the docks forming a hypnotic counterpoint to the cacophony in her head. On one side echoed Charles's practical words, his decades of experience, his grasp of a world where good intentions often led to unintended consequences. On the other side stood the memory of Sophie's smile, so pure and genuine it seemed to defy all economic and corporate logic. Sitting on a wet bench overlooking Science World, its geodesic domes glowing against the gray sky, Isabelle allowed herself to dive into her own history. She remembered her parents arriving from Montreal with little more than determination and a Canadian dream, relying on the kindness of strangers during those first difficult months. She remembered the high school teacher who paid for her supplies out of pocket when her family could not, a gesture that planted the seed that would lead her to study social work. Each memory was a double-edged blade. On one side, confirmation that small acts of generosity can alter life trajectories. On the other, the paralyzing fear that she had romanticized these stories, ignoring the countless times when kindness was not rewarded, but exploited or forgotten. The rain thickened into something more determined, washing not only the city but Isabelle's very soul. She watched the lights shimmering on the dark waters of False Creek, each flicker seeming to represent a different possibility. The possibility that she had been naive, the possibility that she had done the right thing, the possibility that some moral truths simply do not apply in the real world of business. Then her phone vibrated. A message from a classmate at the University of British Columbia inviting her to study for next week's social work theory exam. The irony almost made her laugh, bitter and relieved at once. Here she was, living the case study she had only read about, and reality was proving infinitely more complex and painful than any textbook. She rose from the bench, her clothes soaked through, her resolve renewed in a way even she did not fully understand. Clarity arrived not from certainty, but from accepting uncertainty, from understanding that some moral choices must be made not with the guarantee of a positive outcome, but with the conviction that they are right regardless of consequences. On the way home, passing the closed storefronts of Yaletown, Isabelle made a silent promise. Whatever happened the next day, whether Mark returned with the money, whether Charles fired her, whether the gesture proved as naive as some believed, she would never regret choosing compassion over cynicism. And in that quiet acceptance of the unknown, something extraordinary happened neurologically for the viewer. A massive surge of anticipatory dopamine mingled with a cathartic release of endorphins, creating an emotional dependence on the resolution that kept the audience completely gripped, eager to discover whether Isabelle's faith in human kindness would be rewarded or cruelly broken by reality. When the bell above the Tim Hortons door chimed the next morning, announcing not the simple man Isabelle expected, but a transformed figure who entered with the quiet authority of a Yaletown Technology Chief Executive Officer, CEO, accompanied by an executive team that looked as if it had stepped straight out of a Canadian business magazine, the viewer's brain experienced a shockwave of surprise serotonin and revelation adrenaline that instantly reframed the entire narrative, turning a story about compassion into a study of humility, identity, and the many layers of human experience in multicultural Canada. Sunday morning at the Gastown Tim Hortons carried a different quality, quieter, more contemplative, as if the cafe itself held its breath, anticipating the outcome of the story that had begun to unfold 24 hours earlier. Isabelle worked with sharpened focus, her mechanical movements counterpoint to the storm of emotion simmering beneath her calm surface. Each chime of the door sent her heart leaping for a moment, only to settle again when it revealed another ordinary customer. Charles watched from his office with an expression that mixed professional concern with resigned curiosity. The same curiosity that makes people watch an accident about to happen, unable to look away from the disaster they believe is coming. Then the bell chimed with a different quality, not the casual sound of a morning customer, but a purposeful, present ring, and the entire room seemed to shift. The figure who entered was not the simple man in practical clothes everyone expected, but a transformation so radical that for a breath no one recognized Mark. He wore a tailored suit that spoke of boardroom meetings in Vancouver's high-rises, its expensive cut evident even under fluorescent cafe lights. The posture that once telegraphed discomfort now radiated the steady confidence of someone used to commanding attention and making decisions that move markets. Behind him, two equally polished assistants carried folders and tablets, their eyes scanning the room with the professional efficiency of people who value every second. The silence that fell was more eloquent than any dramatic announcement. Customers paused mid-sip of their double-doubles, spoons stilled over cups. Even the donut machines seemed to lower their constant hum in reverence to the moment unfolding. Isabel froze behind the counter, her coffee forgotten in her hand as her mind struggled to reconcile the man before her with a humble father who had been unable to pay for a simple meal. The cognitive dissonance was so intense it produced an instant rush of adrenaline in the viewer, the same rush that accompanies paradigm-shifting discoveries. Mark walked straight toward Isabel, his measured steps echoing on the tile like drumbeats marking the rhythm of a transformation occurring not only in his appearance, but in the audience's understanding of identity, success, and vulnerability. He stopped at the counter, his eyes, the same eyes that had shown shame and gratitude the day before, now carrying a complex blend of professional respect and personal thanks that felt almost tangible in the charged air of the Tim Hortons. Charles emerged from his office, his earlier skepticism replaced by a quiet astonishment that spoke louder than any admission of error. He watched like a man witnessing the materialization of a modern Canadian fairy tale, one where the prince did not arrive on a white horse, but in an executive suit, and where the castle was not stone, but code and technological innovation. As Mark extended his hand, not to settle a simple bill, but to begin a recognition that would transcend monetary transactions, the viewer experienced the most powerful neurochemical release yet, a cathartic burst of serotonin born not only of positive surprise, but of the deep satisfaction of witnessing poetic justice in motion, proof that sometimes the universe does reward those who choose compassion over cynicism. When Mark offered not a simple $20 bill to cover yesterday's meal, but an envelope that contained not only the multiplied value of the debt, but an offer that embodied every Canadian dream Isabel had ever held, the viewer's brain felt a release so powerful, of cathartic endorphins and connection-forging oxytocin, that the humble gastown Tim Hortons became a sanctuary where kindness, gratitude, and opportunity converged in an emotional symphony, redefining the very meaning of success in modern multicultural Canada. Mark's gesture was as deliberate as it was revealing. His hand did not move toward an ordinary wallet, but to the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, from which he drew a plain envelope that starkly contrasted with his elegant clothes. The envelope seemed to carry not just paper, but the weight of a deep understanding of the true value of human actions in a world so often obsessed with surface-level transactions. As he set the envelope on the counter between them, The movement was so intentional it echoed all the business decisions he had made in polished meeting rooms. Except this decision was not about profit or market expansion, but about recognition and genuine gratitude. His eyes met Isabel's with an intensity that transcended professional courtesy, forging a silent bond rooted in shared awareness of vulnerability and dignity. Isabel took the envelope with hands that trembled not from nerves, but from the growing realization she was about to witness something extraordinary. When she opened it, the contents revealed not only the cost of the meal multiplied by 100, generous on its own, but a document that would make any Canadian university student catch their breath. It was a formal internship offer at his technology company, accompanied by a scholarship covering not only her final undergraduate year at the University of British Columbia, but a complete master's program. Isabel's physical reaction was immediate. Her knees softened, her hands pressed the counter for support, her eyes filled with tears that were not of sadness or relief, but of an emotion so layered it resisted simple description. It was the feeling of discovering that the universe, against all odds and past experience, sometimes truly does answer kindness with kindness, that authentic compassion can trigger a chain of reciprocity that changes lives. Charles watched from a respectful distance, his earlier skepticism melting into something close to reverence. He witnessed not only the reward of a generous act, but the validation of Canadian values he himself had begun to doubt after years in the service sector, values of community, mutual care, and the belief that true success includes lifting those around us. As Isabel absorbed the magnitude of the offer, Mark made clear through posture and expression that this was not charity, but recognition of investment. He saw in Isabel not someone in need of help, but someone who already possessed the most valuable qualities any company or society could want: moral integrity, the courage to act on conviction, and a profound understanding of what truly matters in human interactions. The customers, who had silently witnessed the exchange, began to applaud, not a loud, theatrical ovation, but the reserved Canadian kind that speaks of communal pride and renewed hope. It was the sound of a small community witnessing the embodiment of the country's best spirit, where opportunities are created not through privileged connections or inheritance, but through authentic character and genuine compassion. In that moment, Tim Hortons ceased to be an ordinary cafe and became a microcosm of what Canada aspires to be, a place where different backgrounds meet on common ground, where vulnerability can be turned into strength, and where kindness, against all cynical expectations, proves to be the safest investment one can make. And as Isabel accepted the offer not with words, but with an embrace that transcended social and professional boundaries, the viewer felt the story's fullest neurochemical crest, a simultaneous surge of endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine that created such a powerful sense of emotional completeness it guaranteed not only sharing the tale, but deeply internalizing its central message about the transformative power of authentic compassion. 6 months after that transformative morning at the Gastown Tim Hortons, as Isabel walked the corridors of Mark's technology company not as an intern, but as a community programs coordinator who had developed initiatives replicated across the province of British Columbia, she understood that the true legacy of that compassionate decision did not lie in the scholarship or the job, but in the invisible current of kindness that kept expanding like ripples on a Canadian lake. touching lives she would never know, yet forever carrying the echo of the most powerful lesson about what truly constitutes success in Canada's multicultural mosaic. The next autumn in Vancouver brought not only the yearly transformation of maple leaves, but the full materialization of the change that had begun with a simple act of compassion in an ordinary Tim Hortons. The Gastown Cafe looked the same, but something fundamental in its atmosphere had shifted. Charles, once the epitome of cynical pragmatism, now oversaw a training program that prioritized university students in circumstances like Isabel's, his skepticism replaced by a renewed faith in human potential when supported by community. Isabel, no longer in the red Tim Hortons uniform but in the professional attire of a community programs coordinator at one of Vancouver's most innovative technology firms, saw her work not as a job, but as a mission. The program she designed, drawn directly from her own experience, had already helped dozens of students balance education and work, proving that investing in human potential yields dividends that transcend traditional financial metrics. Mark, in his office overlooking the North Shore Mountains, often reflected on how that moment of vulnerability in Tim Hortons became the catalyst not only for Isabel's transformation, but for his own reassessment of what genuine business success means. His company now measured performance not only in profits and market expansion, but in community impact and opportunities created, a philosophical shift that attracted not only investors, but top talent seeking meaning beyond a paycheck. Sophie, now 9 and still a dedicated goalie on her hockey team, carried not only the memory of that afternoon in Tim Hortons, but the deep understanding that kindness can arise from the most unexpected places and transform reality in ways no one can predict. Her drawings now showed not only hockey scenes, but colorful images of people helping one another, a quiet testimony to a legacy that began with a simple sandwich and a cup of hot chocolate. The real miracle, however, did not rest in individual transformations, but in how the story spread through Vancouver like a benevolent virus of hope. Other businesses in Gastown and beyond implemented similar support policies for students. Local entrepreneurs created emergency funds for employees in difficult moments, and a quiet current of reciprocity began to flow through the city's social fabric. On a sunny autumn Saturday, Isabel returned to the Tim Hortons where it all began, not as a customer or an employee, but as a mentor in the program she had inspired. As she watched a new group of university students learning not only customer service, but practical compassion and community support, she understood that the most enduring legacy was not in any document or contract, but in the lives touched and the stories that would continue to unfold long after her own was forgotten. Charles approached, his face no longer bearing the old resigned weariness, but a quiet contentment born of witnessing the circle complete. He did not need to speak. His simple nod and smile held volumes about journeys of renewed faith and the late discovery that cynicism is a luxury no truly thriving society can afford. And as Isabel left the Tim Hortons that afternoon, walking the same Gastown streets that had witnessed her journey from doubt to conviction, she carried with her a profound understanding that the true Canadian legacy is not built in monuments or institutions, but in the invisible chains of kindness that link strangers into a tapestry of mutual care defining the best of the national character. The cycle that began with a declined card and a compassionate decision now continued its quiet expansion, proving that in the great multicultural experiment that is Canada, the most valuable investment will always be an authentic human kindness, an investment that, against every cynical expectation, consistently yields the most extraordinary return.